Welcome to another episode of Same Page. My name is Sarah Semajust, and this is my lovely husband.
Lenal Semajust.
Today we are in a new environment.
As you can clearly see, so we're broadcasting live from Whitby, Ontario, in the house of my in-laws.
Absolutely, my parents' house. Today's episode is about dating when you're in a long-term relationship. So we are going to touch on 3 different points. We all know that when you're in a long-term relationship, we tend to either forget to date the person or we fall into a routine and we don't make the effort to date the other person, but it is very important to continue to do that. So we'll touch on why it's so important to date when you're in a long-term relationship. We'll talk about choosing the right date based on your partner's love language, as we touched on last week.
Absolutely, yeah.
And finally, we'll give some examples of very inexpensive dates that you can go on, because when we think date, we think dollar signs, and that's not necessarily the case. So Len, why is it so important to date when you're in a long-term relationship?
It's important to date while you're in a long-term relationship because as human beings, we are creatures of habit and we tend to get into routines, and as a result, our relationship is also affected and it kind of gets stagnant at times. So if anything, dating creates this atmosphere where you're constantly in connection and you're creating that connection and you're staying connected to your partner.
Yes, and one thing that we find when you have friends, you make sure to plan little dates or little events with them. And the purpose of that is to stay connected with them so you know what's going on in their lives, you know how they're evolving and growing. But because we live with our partner, we tend to fall into a routine with them. So it's very interesting how we fall into a routine of a person that's mostly significant to us, but with our friends, we make sure to keep it alive. So we want to make sure that we do the same thing with our significant other in order to keep the relationship alive and sparking.
Good point. As human beings, it's important for us to grow and evolve, and hopefully you're taking that time to grow yourself. Hopefully you're also trying to grow as a couple, and that's another reason why it's really important to date while you're in a relationship, is to grow together. And oftentimes you hear that couples grow apart. If you stay connected, that reduces the chances of growing apart.
Absolutely, and a date allows you to do exactly that. Stay connected. You talk to the person, you hear their ideas, you hear how they see their future, you make sure it's aligned with yours and the values are the same. So if you're not staying connected and talking about these things, and typically through taking time to do that with a date, then you might grow apart without knowing it.
Finally, the last reason why you want to date while you're in a relationship is to keep that spark alive. Sarah already alluded to that, but basically, if you keep doing the things you did at the beginning during the relationship, usually that's a good equation for success.
Yes, and that actually reminds you of your beginnings. So if you try to, like Leonard said, try to do the same things that you did at the beginning, you remember your honeymoon phase, you remember why you were attracted to the person initially, and that might give you a little spark to keep going, because you remember all these great things and why you fell in love with that person initially. So like I said, when we think about dating, we think automatically dollar signs, and sometimes we don't have the budget to do it. And dating does not necessarily have to be something that's expensive. The purpose of it is to connect, and there are multiple ways that you can do that without having to spend a lot of money. So what are some ways that we use that are very inexpensive to date and keep connected? What are some examples that we do?
Well, I believe that we are a fairly active couple. So one way is that we would either go work out together, whether it's either going to a gym or just going outside at the track for a run. You can go for a walk in the neighborhood, or you can go for a hike.
Yes, yes. Another example is to go for a scenic drive. You go look at beautiful neighborhoods or a drive by the water. One thing that we like to do actually is go for drives, but also go to open houses. So on Sundays, sometimes, either after church, we will look up what open houses are going on in our neighborhoods, and we will actually just open house hop, if that's a term. And it actually allows us to talk about a future dream together and see if we're on the same page. And so that actually allows us to see our future together.
Absolutely.
And other examples of dates that are inexpensive could be going to a cafe,
Yes.
having dessert together. You know, you can obviously choose depending on your budget. Going for coffee, same idea as the cafe. When you go to a cafe, you can get dessert, coffee, tea, whatever floats your boat. And that could be a very inexpensive way of connecting with your partner. Anything that we've missed?
I think we covered everything. But at the end of the day, you want to make the date your own, and you want to also be very creative.
Yes, very creative. Use your imagination.
Yes.
So how do we choose a date based on your partner's love language? It is very important to do that. So first, you have to know your partner's love language. So go ahead, read the book, The 5 Love Languages by Gary Chapman. And once you know your partner's love language, try to incorporate that within the date. For example, my love language is quality time, and more specifically, quality conversation. So if Len chooses a date that is, for example, going to the movies, I will appreciate it because I love going to movies and I love watching Marvel movies and action movies, etc. But it's not something that's going to fill my love tank. I need to be able to talk to Leonard, connect with him, hear his thoughts, hear his ideas. So I appreciate the gesture, obviously, but it is not something that that I perceive that fills my love tank. I enjoy talking while we go there. I enjoy if we stop and get some food, but watching the movie itself is not the ideal date for me because my love language is quality conversation.
Now, in contrast, for me, going to a movie would be fine. Since my love languages are words of affirmation, then Sarah just simply thanking me for either buying the tickets, buying the snacks, driving her there, like whichever, any way that she can either compliment me or show some appreciation as far as either my initiative or my ideas for the movie or going to the movie or having that option as a date. That's enough to start filling my love tank.
Okay, good. I'm glad. What about receiving gifts and physical touch?
Well, when it comes to those two love languages, it's really easy to incorporate them in most dates. As far as like for receiving a gift, for example, you may want to bring either a small rose or a small gift that will appeal to your partner. And then when it comes to physical touch, you want to find ways during the date to either hug your person or sneak in a touch here or there, hold hands, all ways that you're staying in contact with your person.
Absolutely. Lastly, there's acts of service. Now we want to hear from you. So if your love language is acts of service, what would be an ideal date, and what would the person have to do during that date in order to fill your love tank? So give us some examples of what you may like if your love language is acts of service. Okay.
That's great.
So today we touched on dating in long-term relationships. We talked about why it's so important
to stay connected.
To stay connected. Make sure that you do date and you find some time to do that because it is very important. Make sure to incorporate your partner's love language when you think about the date. Make sure you choose a date that appeals to them.
And finally, you don't need to be extravagant when choosing a date. It could be something that's very inexpensive. All you're gonna need is maybe a little creativity and lots of imagination.
Awesome. All right, so hopefully this episode helped you in your long-term relationship. And don't forget to like, subscribe, or comment. Let us know what you think. All right.
Until next time.
See you.
Bye.
Bye.